With the news that broke yesterday, it definitely seems like Dustin Byfuglien's time in a Winnipeg Jets uniform has came to an end. And if you guys aren't familiar with what I'm talking about, TSN's Frank Saravelli tweeted this out yesterday, hearing the Jets and Dustin Byfuglien are working toward a mutual contract termination over the next several days, which would end his suspension and grievance, and finally give Winnipeg the salary cap clarity they need ahead of trade center. And this is pretty big news because what this means is that Dustin Byfuglien is eventually going to be an unrestricted free agent, and he's forfeiting a lot of money. We saw this happen earlier in the season with the LA Kings and Ilya Kovalchuk, which ultimately led to Kovalchuk signing with the Montreal Canadiens. And if you guys aren't really familiar with the situation between Byfuglien and the Jets that led up to this, I'm going to quickly read a little bit from an article that was written by the Winnipeg Sun back in December because I feel like they did a pretty good job of explaining the overall situation. The article starts out by saying Byfuglien's story is well documented at this point. He showed up a week prior to training camp opening and skated informally with some teammates but failed to show up for the first day of camp. At first, we were told he needed to think some things over. Then we found out that Byfuglien was contemplating his future, perhaps even retirement from the game after 14 seasons. This was followed by the revelation that, unbeknownst to the Jets, Byfuglien had walked into a surgeon's office in Minnesota in late October and had his troublesome ankle that caused him to miss 2 separate stints last season repaired. Byfuglien had already signed off on a clean bill of health following end-of-season medicals after the Jets were bounced from the Stanley Cup playoffs in the first round, so the team wouldn't have suspected anything. News of Byfuglien's surgery was followed by an awkward interview with general manager Kevin Cheveldayoff while the team was on the road in California. When pressed on the matter, Cheveldayoff said nothing of substance because the NHL had muzzled the organization after assuming the reins with a pending grievance looming from the NHLPA. That grievance was eventually filed, with Byfuglien looking to recoup the $8 million he is owed this season, money set forth in his contract that was frozen after the Jets suspended him without pay for not showing up to camp. And this entire thing was basically like a he said, she said scenario where Dustin Byfuglien was saying one thing and the Jets were saying another. Obviously, nothing got solved, and that is why we are where we are today, where the Jets and Byfuglien are just trying to work towards them terminating the rest of his contract. And the fact that they are moving towards contract termination just shows you how bad things really got between Byfuglien and the Jets, and that relationship was just beyond repair. Because Byfuglien is forfeiting a total of $14 million, including the salary he was owed this season and next year. That is a ton of money. And it really just shows you that Byfuglien must have just wanted this whole thing to be over and wants to move forward on into his career with a new team. And like I said at the start, if this whole termination of the contract goes through, he will become a UFA. I want to quickly go over Byfuglien's stats from last season and just give you guys my overall thoughts on where I think he is right now as a player and how valuable he could be to some teams. Byfuglien had a really good year last season. He played in 42 games and had 31 points and finished the year with a +4 rating. He also had a really good first round playoff series against the Blues where he finished with 8 points in 6 games. And of course, if Byfuglien is still the player that he was last season and in recent years for the Winnipeg Jets, there are going to be a lot of NHL teams that want to bring him in. But we really just don't know that because Dustin Byfuglien is 34 years old and is coming off of foot surgery. He hasn't played in the NHL since then, and we don't really even know if he's going to be the same player. Now, another thing is we have no clue what Dustin Byfuglien is going to want on a contract if he does become a UFA in terms of money and term. Is he going to want something like Ilya Kovalchuk? I really can't see it just because Byfuglien is forfeiting $14 million in this contract termination. I feel like he's going to want a good chunk of change in his new deal. But now that you guys have a good idea of the entire situation involving Dustin Byfuglien, let's get into the main part of today's video. I want to talk about 5 potential teams that I could see signing Dustin Byfuglien to a new contract when he becomes a UFA. The first team is the Chicago Blackhawks. They're the team that drafted Dustin Byfuglien. They're the team that he spent his first years in the NHL with, and he actually won a Stanley Cup with them in 2010. So I could see a lot of reasons why Dustin Byfuglien would maybe want to return to Chicago, and of course Chicago could use the help on the blue line as well. Now, of course, the Blackhawks don't really have a lot of cap space, but I feel like if a team is to only sign Dustin Byfuglien for the remainder of this season, it obviously isn't going to cost them a lot of money, and I definitely think that would give Byfuglien a good opportunity to show other teams that he is still capable of being a very good and useful NHL player, and then he could head into the summer as a UFA and then get his payday. Currently, the Blackhawks sit about 3 points out of a playoff spot in the Western Conference wildcard race, and they're definitely kind of a mediocre defensive team. They allow 3.06 goals against per game, which is in the middle of the pack in the NHL, but they do allow a league-leading 35.3 shots against per game. And if Byfuglien is still the player that he was before the ankle surgery, I think adding him to this blue line will go a long way for the Hawks in terms of their hopes of making the playoffs, and just given the fact that they are the team that drafted him into the NHL, and there's kind of a connection between the two, I see them as a potential landing spot for Buff. The next team I have is the Toronto Maple Leafs. Of course, if you're going to have a big name defenseman on the market, you're going to have the Toronto Maple Leafs name thrown around, especially if Dustin Byfuglien does not want a lot of money just to play for the remainder of this season. And Toronto is still a team that is looking to improve the blue line. Even after they brought in Jake Muzzin, Cody Ceci, Tyson Barrie, they're still looking to improve. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if Ceci isn't even a Leaf anymore after the deadline. And if you can get Dustin Byfuglien on a bargain contract for the rest of the season, that would be a massive help for the Toronto Maple Leafs. And if Dustin Byfuglien maybe wants to do a little bit of ring chasing, Toronto wouldn't be a bad team to go to just for the remainder of this season. But again, it's only possible if he doesn't want a lot of money, and it's probably just like a one-year deal or something like that. The next team I have is the Minnesota Wild, and the reason why is because they are Dustin Byfuglien's hometown team, and if he becomes a UFA, he's gonna have full control, and maybe that is something that he would want to do. And Minnesota isn't entirely out of the playoff race either, and of course I think he'd be a pretty big help for them. Next up I have the New York Islanders. They're a team that does have a lot of cap space, so if he did want a good chunk of change, then they are a team that would be able to give it to him, and given the fact that defenseman Adam Pelech is most likely out for the remainder of the season, they definitely could use a little bit of help on the blue line, and they are a team that is competing for a playoff spot. So again, if Byfuglien does want to do a little bit of ring chasing, I don't think they'd be a bad team to go to. And lastly, we have the Columbus Blue Jackets, a team that I personally counted out heading into the season, but they have proven me and a lot of other people wrong. They're a team that is looking like they are going to make the playoffs if they continue to play like they are right now, and maybe instead of going out to the deadline and making a win now trade, they could do it in signing Dustin Byfuglien. They have a ton of cap space, so I definitely don't think that would be a problem, and he would just add to their already stacked blue line, so they're definitely a team that came to mind for me. So that is pretty much going to wrap up today's video. I went over basically everything that I wanted to talk about. I didn't want to spend too much time on it, but I did think it would be a pretty interesting video to make. And of course, make sure to let me know down in the comment section below, what do you think of the whole situation, and most importantly, what do you think the future holds for Dustin Byfuglien in the NHL? And with all that being said, I really hope you guys did enjoy today's video. If you did, please make sure to go down there and drop a like on it, and subscribe to the channel for some more NHL content, and I will see you guys all in tomorrow's video.